All right, welcome to Mississippi State Live here on the Voice of College Football. Andrew Miller and Christian Ballard here on a Monday evening. Apologies for the delay. Had some technical difficulties that we just got sorted out to make sure we were able to go tonight. But yeah, it may be a little bit of a different setup. Christian's having to go through his phone, so hopefully it all goes smoothly. Obviously, technology gives plenty of problems to us all, so we'll see how that goes tonight. But should still be a really fun show tonight because we got a lot of great topics to talk about with Mississippi State football, some key players announcing their return to Mississippi State, some players committing to the Bulldogs out of the transfer portal, and obviously Mississippi State targeting a lot of key players. So we're going to get into all of that on tonight's episode. But as you are tuning in, if you could leave us a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are not already, turn the notification bell on so you do know when we do go live, and also want to keep up because I've been recording some shorter videos to go up on the channel to some of the instant reactions to some of the news. I know we have the one for Kelley Jones up and should be getting one on Marquise Johnson up later, although we're going to talk about Johnson tonight on the show as well. So good stuff coming on the channel. You're going to want to keep up with all that. And hey, if you could share the stream, tell the state fans in your life about what we're doing here, Mississippi State Live on the Voice of College Football, we would certainly appreciate that. Christian, how was your Monday?
Well, outside of the tech issues, work was pretty good, so I guess that's a plus, and just good to be home. And yeah, I mean, I hate that college football season is winding down, but excited that we'll crown a champion within a week, couple weeks, and we got a couple good playoff games coming around the corner, and a lot of good news for Mississippi State lately. We'll talk about some transfers and visits, and I'm excited to dive into this one.
Yeah, that playoff may determine whether or not I choose to care about college football whatsoever for the entire rest of my life. Just being completely honest, I'm not going to quit the show or anything, but I may just be a person here saying words with no emotion or thought behind them, depending on the results of that playoff. So we'll see how that goes because that's going to impact my mental well-being for quite some time. Will SB in the chat, birthday boy Levy making moves. It appears so. And hopefully the guy they got on campus tonight, they can make that happen because that would certainly be a big deal for the Bulldogs. But let's talk about one of the moves that has already happened and been made official, and that is the return of Kelley Jones for Mississippi State. Bulldogs top corner made his announcement that he will be returning to Mississippi State for his redshirt junior year. Obviously had everybody a little bit worried because he made the post after the Mayo Bowl that it was a thanks for everything, Mississippi State. See you until next time, which is kind of a, I'm saying I'm going without saying I'm going. I guess he was maybe finding ways to build some anticipation for the ultimate announcement that he would be coming back to Mississippi State. But it's huge. Obviously, he had a massive season for State, was a complete shutdown corner, locked down his side of the field. I mean, you had games where teams literally just did not throw at him. You run through the numbers: 34 tackles, 2 picks, 11 passes broken up, 13 pass deflections or passes defended was the second in the SEC. We've all seen the numbers going around from PFSN, all that have gotten shared for how he graded out as an SEC corner, where he was number 1 in the SEC in catch rate allowed at 28.9, number 1 in the SEC in forced incompletions with 11, the second highest forced incompletion rate. And he had the 4th highest grade amongst SEC cornerbacks. I mean, this was a guy who was an elite player and played at a first-round level for Mississippi State this season. And when you play at a first-round level in the SEC, you're eligible to be drafted, you're probably going to the NFL draft more often than not. But, obviously he got the word back that teams felt – I think the consensus was, hey, like obviously he would get taken and he'd probably go late day 2. I would have to think he would be drafted in a good spot. But if he comes back and has another year like he did this season, there's no question he will be a first-round pick of the 2027 NFL draft. It's one of those deals because of his age and because he hasn't shown the continued production over multiple seasons. Teams are a little bit, they're not going to invest a first-round pick in that. But if he builds off of this year and, again, just maintains the level he performed at, we're talking about a first-round pick. And look, you couldn't have faulted him if he had still made the decision that he was going to ultimately go to the NFL this year. You would have fully understood it and you would have supported him. But for Mississippi State, it's huge getting a player like that back in the defense as you try to turn this thing around. And Zach Arnett now gets an elite cornerback to work with, Christian.
No doubt. Kelly Jones has been a phenomenal playmaker for us on defense. A couple key games that he really stood out in, the Arizona State game, of course. He was a key contributor for the defense to come away with a victory there. And, even though we had a tough loss against Wake Forest, to have four tackles in there in that game, I think is still pretty fantastic for him. And um, Arkansas, we had a close win, kind of a scare there, but five tackles for him. I think that was probably his highest outside of the Arizona State game because he had about 6 or 7 there. And, it's like he has contributed every single week, but it hasn't been one of those where he gets better every single week. And I think that kind of plays a factor into him coming back is, hey, I didn't have the season I wanted, but I can get better and actually be a full-time Mississippi State Bulldog next year and just ball out and get, obviously you want to get your draft stock up, but I mean, let's say if this team hits 7 or 8 wins next year, could he be a key factor for the defense that kind of forces that to happen? I think so.
I mean, I think he did have the season he wanted to have. He went from being a guy that really was not a contributor that much in 2024. He played a lot, but it was not his best because he was still growing. He was at that point, he was a redshirt freshman, still learning the cornerback position. We know the athleticism was there. He's 6'4", 195, runs a 4.4. If you turn those physical tools and athleticism into high-level coverage skills, again, you can be an elite player. He just hadn't put it together, but he closed out 2024 with a good Egg Bowl performance, even in a loss, played well in that game, and really broke out this year. You talked about the Arizona State game. I think that was his best performance going up against a first-round pick in Jordan Tyson, who's going to be one of the first receivers taken off the board this year. Locked him down. I know Tyson had a few catches, but he was not getting those catches going up against Kelley Jones. And he had a really outstanding year throughout the season. I thought he played really well against Texas. And you had games where teams literally just didn't throw his way. So, yeah, he can definitely continue to improve, get better for sure. But I think, again, if he just has the year he had this year, next year, it's a first-round pick. But getting him back is huge. Zach Arnett, the way he loves to play defense, being so aggressive up front, that obviously puts more pressure on your secondary. Having a guy that you trust, hey, he can play man coverage and go one-on-one against the opposing team's top receiver is massive. And Arnett didn't do this a lot when he was at State, but we saw some this year, like Kelley Jones would get, play man coverage in the slot, which is not something you see teams do a lot of. They'll typically keep their corners just on the outside, and there's reasons for that. And Arnett typically did that when he was at State. But the fact that Jones can align in the slot against good receivers and play man, like that adds to what he can do. But so it gives you a lot of help as a coach who wants to play aggressive. It helps you out from a coverage standpoint because if he's got that guy manned up, well, I can play more conservative coverage elsewhere on the field, and I can protect my other DBs who may not be as talented. So he's going to be the cornerstone piece of the defense. Getting him back is huge for MSU, and that's the biggest win you possibly could have had for State this offseason, I think, was retaining Kelley Jones at corner because it's just going to make your life so much easier on defense. If you don't have at least one high-level corner on your team, it's hard to really play defense at a high level. And I know State's got a long way to go if they're going to be playing high-level defense, but having him in place at least gives you one of those building blocks you can work around. A couple other Bulldogs have announced their returns on the defensive side of the ball. I think over the weekend, DJ Reed, the defensive lineman, Auburn transfer, who flashed early in the season and made some decent plays over the course of the year, had 2 sacks on the season, which I believe was tied for the team lead. He announced his intention to return. I think that's a good rotational piece along the defensive line. You'll get Trevion Williams back for his final year of college football, who, look, it still has not become the player we were hoping for when he signed with State as a 4-star coming out of high school. I know everybody has said it time and time again. When he signed, you thought he was going to be the next great MSU defensive lineman. It hasn't materialized that way. Not fully on him. He's dealt with injury. He's obviously dealt with a couple schematic changes, a couple changes in terms of D-line coach. And he's getting another change in terms of D-line coach this year. with Ty Warren taking over in that role. But he did have probably his best year as a Mississippi State Bulldog this season, and at least became a guy that you could feel comfortable putting on the field, I think. So even if that's just what he is, a couple depth pieces on the defensive lineman, I like the guys you have that can come back there. Zachary Tillman at linebacker announcing his return. That's huge. Very talented player, very disruptive linebacker with a high ceiling. State's linebacker room is in great shape. So you've got several key pieces have already announced their intentions to return. You go back, and I apologize if your dog's going crazy in the background. You go back to earlier in the offseason, obviously, with keeping Camario, which was you expected, but still that's big. Keeping Fluff Bothwell, Tyler Lockhart choosing to come back. Like, you've had a lot of these key foundational pieces announce their returns. Kelley Jones now a part of that. Still waiting to see what's going to happen with Anthony Evans and Isaac Smith. Those are the two big names that if you get those two back, you held on to everyone you had to hold on to if you were Mississippi State. And nothing new there, although I think all the word is that it's positive developments and they think State's going to be able to keep those guys. I think Isaac Smith would thrive in Arnett's defense. Obviously, he was recruited to play for Arnett. I think he would be great in that middle safety role. Anthony Evans, look, I've talked about with Ant that if you do lose him, I don't think it's the end of the world from a offensive standpoint and a talent standpoint, just because I think he's a very good player. I just think finding a slot receiver to come be productive in this offense is not that difficult to do. But having a guy that is really good, has done it in this system, that you can have Camario get another year of development with that receiver would be big. And from a perception standpoint, you don't want to lose one of your top receivers once again, because that's been a theme now for a few years. The State's not been able to hold on to those guys. If you get those guys back, you're really in a good spot. One other name, look, I've said it a few times. I'm a big Jere Bledsoe fan. I think he's got the potential to be a really, maybe not a game wrecker along the defensive interior, but a consistently disruptive interior defensive lineman. I think he could play that role really well. So I would love to see him announce that he's coming back. But overall, State's done a great job in terms of roster retention this offseason. You still have not lost a player to this point that you feel you would get beat up over for losing. Speaking of guys who have hit the portal, and we're going to run through this quick because obviously, since the portal has officially opened, you've had a few more guys enter. Couple DBs, safety Cyrus Reyes and corner Elijah Cannon. Two guys that have gotten reps for State over the past couple seasons, but not necessarily impact guys. We'll see where they move on. Offensive lineman Kobe Keenum, the Kentucky transfer a season ago. I don't even know if he played all that much this year. I know when he ultimately signed, there was some thought maybe he could be a guy that would compete for a starting job at Mississippi State. And I think a lot of people assumed he was going to be, but Cannon Boone ends up winning that starting job at center this season. And, Keenum couldn't beat out any of the other guys at guard. Do wonder if you're going to see Keenum now. Starting out with Keenum. I do wonder if you're going to see Cannon Boone back. There's talk of him being able to get approved for a 6-year of eligibility because of a couple injuries impacting his college career. I thought Cannon Boone overall played pretty well for Mississippi State this season for all State's offensive line struggles. And, Boone did not have a great performance in the bowl game, but overall for the year, center was not the problem for Mississippi State's offensive line. Getting Cannon Boone back and having an experienced guy leading the way in the middle of that offensive line would be great. So I hope you are able to hope he gets granted that extra year of eligibility. You get him back. Defensive lineman Kai McClendon obviously missed this entire season because of an offseason injury. Had to play as a freshman last year and showed some flashes. And a guy that probably could be you think he is talented and probably could be a contributor for State. But with a lot of the guys you have returning along the interior of that defensive line, plus the guys you're going to go out in the portal, just not a lot of opportunity for him. So we'll see where he lands. Running back Seth Davis. It really sucks what happened for Seth in his career. The injury suffered in the 2023 Egg Bowl, putting him behind the 8 ball in terms of being able to – that's a guy who I think would have been a really good running back in the SEC and a guy who probably would have been a really good contributor here in Mississippi State's offense. And it's great that he was able to get back into action this year for at least the one game and get that touchdown against Alcorn State. That was really cool to see for him. But I know a lot of people who have said Seth is just not quite the same guy that he was pre-injury. And, for him, ultimately, he's going to have to find an opportunity elsewhere. You wish him the absolute best. The one name transferring out that does kind of catch your eye a little bit, Luke Work, and this is the more intriguing one. Offensive line um, had to make starts at tackle, at left tackle for Mississippi State as a true freshman. And look, nobody was good for that Mississippi State offensive line that year, but ultimately, I thought kind of held his own, right, and was okay. And this year makes the move inside to guard, but was never able to win out a starting job over Jacoby Jackson. Got some reps in the bowl game, kind of came in there for Zach Owens and probably handled things a little bit better, though still wasn't a great showing. I wonder the situation there, if it's just they feel that they've got other guys ahead of him in the room that they're more confident in, guys they're going to go after in the portal. We'll see. I think Luke Work still has the potential to be a solid player, but that's a guy, again, I think you would like to have him on the roster, just a guy with some experience and a guy who has shown you some ability here and there, but also not someone that you can fully lock in on. Look, let's be honest about Mississippi State's offensive line. There's not a single spot on Mississippi State's offensive line where you can say you got to keep that guy with the way that group performed. I don't trust the ability to completely overturn things in the portal, but at the same time, that's a group that had the struggles that it did. Speaking of the portal, let's go into that now and talk about some of the guys State picked up. And we'll start with Marquise Johnson coming out of Missouri. Christian, I think this guy has a chance to be a really explosive and impressive player for Mississippi State in the receiving corps.
Yeah, Marquise Johnson, I don't have his stats pulled up, but that's the name I heard a couple times this season and maybe the last year or so at Missouri. And obviously that's been a school that has just put out some really good wide receivers in the NFL. You talk about guys like Luther Burden or whoever. So, I mean, you look, there's that side of it. The other side of it would be the need for a wide receiver and just maybe an extra target. Um, it just bringing a guy like that in, I think, maybe gives the offense a little bit of life to work with this offseason, and hopefully it can transition onto the field. But that's a guy that I did see. I think I had sent it to you, actually, and I'm sure you had saw the news too. But that's one I definitely want to look into a little bit more and come back and visit that and just see what he can do.
Yeah, so I love this addition for State. 92 overall 4-star according to 247 Sports, number 14 wide receiver in the portal. 5'11", 185, played outside for Mizzou. I think played in the slot some. They'd move him in there, but he was an outside receiver at Missouri. And it's the profile Mississippi State wants. He's fast. He's a speedy guy. 4.29 940, hit big plays for Mizzou. I mean, as a freshman, averaged 29.5 yards per catch. Where really all he was doing in the offense was they would bring him in to go take deep shots down the field, and he was very effective in that. 3 seasons at Missouri, 66 catches for 1,075 yards, 6 touchdowns. Didn't see his production continue to really grow as much as you would have liked over the course of his career, but I also think a lot of that is a product of Missouri's passing attack the last couple of seasons just not being all that good. Brady Cook did not take the step forward you would have liked to have seen in his final season for the Tigers. And then this past year, Bo Pribula just didn't have a great connection with Johnson. Christian, you might remember this, the end of the Alabama-Missouri game where Missouri has the 4th down and there was the receiver who was wide open that Pribula didn't see.
Yep.
That was Marquise Johnson, who was waving his hands around going crazy. So they didn't
I didn't know that was Marquise Johnson, but I do remember that ending of that game. So
yeah, so didn't have a great connection with Pribula, but once Pribula got hurt and Mizzou's pass game became non-existent, like he didn't have any production down the stretch. It's not a reflection on him as a player. This is a guy that when he is targeted with accurate passes can be really, really effective. He's able to go up and get the football consistently, can win one-on-one. I mean, the thing that stood out to me is the number of his big receptions that I've watched where it should have been a touchdown and it ends up just having to be a big play and he has to go and adjust for the football because it was an underthrow or an inaccurate pass. He can go get the football. And again, he can win one-on-one. I think he's got a good catch radius. He's not the biggest guy at just, again, 5'11", 195 or 185, but I think he's got a good catch radius and has made some impressive grabs in his career. I think he's a really nice pickup for State. I think he fills the Brennan Thompson role in the offense. And if you get Anthony Evans back as well, having a pair of big play receivers for Kamario Taylor to work with, I think State's receiving corps is in a pretty good spot overall. And I think they could go after at least one more guy if they wanted to because of the number of players that they're losing out of that room. But I think the potential of a guy like San Francisco McGee, if he finally gets the opportunity to shine, could be really big. Aiden Williams showed you some solid things this year. He's not going to be the most explosive player that I think when you signed him, you were kind of hoping that could be his role, and maybe he can grow into that. I mean, frankly, he showed some of that in the spring, to be completely honest. But definitely a guy that I thought was sure-handed when State did target him. I think he blocks well, there's value in having that in the receiving corps. I like the freshman class coming in. So I think State's got a good group of wideouts. I really like this pickup of Marquise Johnson. And again, if they want to go get one more guy, I'll understand it. But I think you've got weapons in the receiving corps, and I think this guy's going to be able to step in and have a really impressive season for State. Question here from Trey Clark, going back to the offensive line discussion. Can anybody remember the last O-line we signed out of high school who was a really good player? Cross, maybe arguably Reese. Cross was the only one where it was undoubtedly great start to finish throughout his career. Maybe I'm not fully remembering some of the linemen Leach had, and in terms of how, frankly, remember which guys were signed out of high school, which a lot of those offensive linemen would have been guys who would have signed with Moorhead. I'm not going to pull up the roster here in the middle of the stream. There was a couple other linemen on like the 22, 23 teams who had been MSU signees that ended up playing well, if I remember correctly. So it wasn't just Cross. Cross was the one who was obviously an elite player. Reese ended up, I guess, having a fine career when it was all said and done, but he was never a great tackle. And I think Reese would have always been best suited if he could have played guard, but they had to have him play tackle. So he was not a great player there out on the edge, though, but he was serviceable for State. State offensive line development's been a problem for State. Like, it has been a big problem. Charles Big Money Cross, yeah, that contract's insane, like $40 million a year. Shout out to him. Dude is balling now. O-line development's been a massive problem. I mean, it's going back now a couple coaching staffs, and I don't love the fact that some of the guys that they have signed over the last couple of years are already hitting the portal again. I'm going to talk more about offensive line later when we get into portal targets and the fact that you've not been able to continue to develop that position, which is a position I think you do have to develop, and you cannot rely on doing it through the portal to make it work. It's concerning. At a certain point, they got to get these freshmen to hit and have guys that they can coach up in the program over multiple seasons. But yeah, we'll see what happens there. Couple more commitments for Mississippi State. And I'll start off, we'll go to offense here because this one happened just earlier this evening. We called it on this show. A.J. Swan commits to Mississippi State, former Vanderbilt Commodore, then spent time at LSU, and then this past season was the quarterback at App State, I believe prior to injury. This season for the Mountaineers, in 7 games, completed about 57% of his passes. 59% of his passes for 1,495 yards, 10 touchdowns, 8 picks. Not the biggest numbers. Really didn't play at LSU. And then Vanderbilt, as a true freshman, was impressive. 9 games for the Commodores, 58% completions, 1,274 in the passing, 10 touchdowns, just 2 picks. And then the next year, 12 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. We had about 243 yards per game as a sophomore at Vandy. A guy who's now bounced around. Obviously, this is school number 4 for him, but a guy who has made starts in the SEC and a veteran player who has shown potential at points in his career. But the big thing is, like, this is a guy that, again, he has started in the SEC. The reason A.J. Swan came up on this show, and obviously we didn't actually predict Mississippi State was going to land A.J. Swan. I was very adamant in that clip that I shared to my Twitter that I wasn't saying State was going to get A.J. Swan, but it was more when looking at the list of transfer quarterback options, A.J. Swan made sense just in that Kamario Taylor is your quarterback, and you're not going to get someone who is expecting to go out and play, frankly. And I know AJ Swan, I think he did the interview with one of the beat writers and talked about, Levy's giving him the opportunity to compete. Yeah, every coach is going to give you the opportunity to compete. If for some reason he came in and balled out and beat out Kamario Taylor, okay. Realistically, he's coming here to be a veteran backup. You don't want to bring in another young QB. One, a lot of those guys aren't going to want to come on because they're going to see Kamario Taylor and see, well, he's going to be the quarterback for the next few years. Two, you don't have to turn it over to a freshman or a sophomore if Kamario were to get hurt. You want a veteran guy who can step in, who has done the job before, and that's what AJ Swan gives you. I don't know anything about him from a talent standpoint. I haven't watched AJ Swan in so long. I couldn't tell you anything about it in terms of his ability. I know people are talking about the fact that he's not a runner and therefore he's not a fit for Levy's offense. Being able to run is not a prerequisite for operating this system. I know fans feel like it is because Levy has liked to use the quarterback run game in the past, and especially after Blake Shapen having the struggles he did, it's like, well, you better have a quarterback who can move. This system does not require it. It doesn't. You can operate the system with a guy who's more of just a pocket passer, or I guess just a passing quarterback. And what you're looking for here is just the idea of a guy who's done it in the SEC and has shown the ability to be a competent starter. AJ Swan has done that. I'm sure, can provide some valuable experience in the room, can be someone for Kamario Taylor to lean on from a developmental standpoint. This is an addition that makes a lot of sense. You weren't going to go out and get a more talented player. You weren't going to go out and land a guy who's going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the portal. You were not going to go out and find your Trinidad Chambliss. I'm sure there's some Mississippi State fans who are sitting here right now like, why can't we just go get our own guy out of the D2 ranks who was awesome at that level? Like, as if it's easy. That's not. Ole Miss got incredibly lucky that it worked out the way that they did for them in terms of landing Chambliss. So this is about as good as State can do, and I think it's a solid addition for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I think it was clear that this needed to be a target, and at least in terms of getting a quarterback, but it adds depth and competition for Kamario Taylor should anything go sideways this offseason or, maybe within the first couple of weeks of 2026. And, you bring up a good point about Trinidad Chambliss, not to try to compare AJ Swan to him, but I mean, look, Ole Miss got their guy and it actually worked out. It's not a lot that you can go and pull a G5 kid, bring him to the SEC, and poof, he's going to work out. I mean, that's like a 1 in a million almost type of thing that could happen. So, I mean, and plus, I mean, you're getting a guy that knows the SEC. I mean, he's been at Vanderbilt and everything. So, I mean, of course, he's probably going to know your schedule. He's probably going to know some of these defenses. He's got that in conference, experience that he could build off of, and hopefully, should he get a chance with this offense, I mean, maybe it could help out some of the younger guys.
Yeah, I mean, and look, ideally, AJ Swan never plays for Mississippi State other than the garbage time. That's what you were ultimately hoping when you go when you go and get this guy. But you didn't have a lot of options. Your pool of talent that you could pick from was going to be pretty limited there. And I think AJ Swan was about as realistic and good as you can do. You like the addition. The other pickup Mississippi State had today along the defensive line, they get edge rusher Jason Jenkins from Florida State. And when you look at the transfer ratings, 87 overall, according to 247 Sports, the number 35 edge rusher, number 267 overall player within the portal, 6'6", 276. A guy that started his career at Tennessee, was a solid recruit coming out of high school, had good offers coming out, kind of worked his way up, and as a redshirt sophomore, impressed as a part of a really good Tennessee defensive line group, got rotational snaps and had a good season. He made 13 games, had 9 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble. Not numbers that jump off the page, but as a backup defensive lineman for a D line that was running like 3 deep that year for Tennessee, like he showed flashes. And there was a lot of excitement around his potential that if he went to a place where he was going to be the starter, could have a big year. Goes to Florida State and was one of their more coveted commitments out of the transfer portal. Allegedly got big money there. Had an injury in the offseason, and you wonder how much that bothered him, messed with him. Didn't have the year that he was hoping for. Ultimately, on the season, made 16 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. Started 4 games for the Seminoles. Not the season that they were expecting, and not the type of production from a starting defensive lineman, defensive end especially, that you would look at and say, like, that's a guy that we're expecting to come in and be a big-time player for State. In fact, running the same defense that State's going to run this year, because Florida State's DC, who I'm blanking on his name right now, the reason Zach Arnett was on Tony White, the reason Zach Arnett was on staff at Florida State as an analyst is because Tony White is another guy off that Rocky Long 3-3-5 tree. So those guys had familiarity with one another. So, he's been in this defense and didn't really shine. And it's kind of like, okay, that could be a little bit questionable. I think you have to hope that Zach Arnett saw something in him that thinks he could be more of the player that he was more as a redshirt freshman or redshirt sophomore at Tennessee. If that's the player he is, and then that type of production gets put out over as a starter or as a backup over the course of 12 games and has a nice productive year, then it's a little bit of a different story. Then it's a successful addition. I don't know what State's paying from an NIL standpoint for this pickup. Feels like it's probably a depth piece. I would be surprised if this is the guy that's coming in and starting for your defensive line, but maybe there's a world where he is. Maybe it does click for him, and he's more of the player that he flashed his ability to be a couple seasons ago. You would hope for more, obviously, and you would hope for him to be a guy that could step in and be a more dominant force. But you're also hoping Mississippi State can go out and add more guys to the defensive line. And we'll get into more of that here later in the episode, as there's other guys at that position that they're looking at. You have to get some guys in the boat, though. And if he can, again, tap into his potential, it could be a really a good addition for Mississippi State ultimately. So right now, just 3 portal commitments for the Bulldogs, unless something has happened here as we're recording. One other name that State I know feels good about is former Georgia cornerback Daniel Harris. Made a visit to Starkville, and it sounds like things went well for him. This year, kind of battled injuries for Georgia and didn't necessarily have the greatest year. I think kind of fell behind on the depth chart. But in 2024, he was a starter in the Georgia secondary. And I believe made 7 starts for Georgia overall. As a sophomore, 22 tackles, half tackle for loss, 3 passes broken up. Made 7 starts, 6'3", 195. Got good size, projects as a power conference starter. If you get him, you feel like you got your guy opposite of Kelley Jones. Really didn't talk about it with Kelley Jones when we talked about that earlier in the show, what it means in terms of your portal approach. Getting Kelley Jones back means that if Mississippi State, you basically have to go out and get one guy that you're confident can start at corner. You want to get 2 guys that you think could be quality players. I don't think you can get by only taking in one portal corner in this class. You got to go get multiple guys. But if you get one guy that you feel really good can start opposite of Kelley Jones, you feel solid. And I think Daniel Harris is a guy who can do that. And if State's got a couple pair of quality corners, then I think defensively that you're in a good spot. So Harris is a name that if Mississippi State can get him on board, would be a really nice pickup for them. Christian, when we look at State, I know we've talked about their biggest needs in the portal already, but with some of the additions they've made so far, is there any spots you look at and think, okay, now this becomes a bigger priority? Do you think they've addressed their needs thus far? Like, do you think they would need another receiver? Do you think, AJ Swan's not cutting it? Maybe you got to go find another quarterback. The cornerback, I was about to say cornerback, but defensive line, are there other edge rushers? What is your thought right now? Some of the guys, like position-wise, where Mississippi State might want to turn?
No, I feel like it never hurts to add a little bit of depth. So if they want to stick to maybe some more pass rush or offensive line or you know whatever, maybe even at quarterback, because I mean you got Kamario Taylor, you got Swan now, but you got to keep in mind like who else is left that you're going to lean on and trust in this quarterback competition for next year? At least let's be honest. I mean, it's Camario's to lose, so you kind of need that competition to see. Okay, who's Mr. Reliable should something happen to Camario Taylor? So it never hurts to go after transfer quarterbacks. I would say maybe you look into that a little bit. Maybe I don't know. Do you go after maybe an extra receiver or two? Do you just keep adding key pieces there? Do you look in the running back column? So I don't know. I'm more as much as I love defense. I know the truth of it is you need some offense in college football today. So I would think you look on the offensive side a little bit more and maybe see what extra weapons and offensive linemen you can get.
Yeah, look, it's O-line more than anything else. And, I definitely don't think you would go after another quarterback. I was just interested if you had thoughts like A.J. Swan, like that's not going to cut it. But,
Yeah.
no, and you're right. You just want to make sure you have somebody in there that if something happens to Kamara, you're fine there. Receiver is the most interesting thing because they are replacing a lot. I could see them go for another addition. I would like to see stylistically a different guy than what they have.
Right.
Or look, frankly, I actually say that maybe you do look for more of a true slot type because Ant Evans is one of the few. I think you have Ant Evans and then Grayson Harris, who was a true freshman this year, didn't really play all that much. Ricky Johnson was the backup in the slot, but I think he's also a guy that could kind of also play outside. Maybe you look for someone else there. I could see them going after another receiver just to feel really confident about having a more complete group in that room. I also think from a pass catcher standpoint, tight end is going to be a big thing. I think they're going to need to add multiple tight ends because of the number of guys you're losing out of that room. Maybe running back. I don't think they need to. I think you're probably fine with Bothwell and Gaden. I know there's been some talk because of the way they closed the season that you didn't see totally enough there, but I also think J.J. Hill stepping in is a guy that could probably play early and be a good contributor for you. I think a lot of the needs are defensively, where you're going to have to hit defensive line, both the interior and the edge position heavily. You're going to need a couple corners to get in the fold. You're going to need multiple safeties. I don't know if you need a linebacker. Maybe if there's a guy that you just think would be a really solid addition, but you're probably fine there. Biggest thing is offensive line. Biggest thing is trench play overall. So let's get into that now and talk about where State is looking in terms of targets. And we're not going to hit every single name that's visited. Not going to talk about every single guy that could be trending one way or another for State. In fact, I just got a message from one of my friends about an offensive lineman that I knew had visited that apparently is trending positively for Mississippi State that I didn't put down because I didn't really have him as the top of the list. So, we'll see how that works out. But more than anything, State's got to revamp this offensive line room. That is the biggest thing this team has to do. You cannot go forward with an offensive line that is as poor as what you put out there the last 2 years, but especially this season. You got to fix it. It's not going to be easy to do because of the number of players you have to add and the fact that portaling an offensive line, as I've said repeatedly, is very difficult to pull off. But State doesn't really have a choice. They've got to go out and land as good of offensive line as they can out of the portal. It's just the situation that they have put themselves in. And if that means spending all of your NIL on that, well, then maybe that's just what they're going to have to do because of how bad that group is. They've got to get that figured out. A few names, though, that we're looking at. Probably the top target, Grant Segrin out of Oklahoma State. I believe a top 12, top 10 offensive line prospect in the portal, according to On3. I know 247 is a bit lower on him, but On3 and Rivals have a higher grade. Auburn, Arkansas also in the mix there. I think Northwestern and also Oklahoma State also kind of in the mix for him, even though it's his old school. A guy that, I think started his career at Nebraska. and has played quite a bit for the Pokes over the past season. Seems to be like he could be a quality addition. Then you look at a name that was very kind of interesting, Anwar O'Neal out of Delaware. I like guys transferring up. I'm not big on outside of guys who are leaving a situation where there's a coaching change, which would be a case with a guy like Segrin, or a name that we'll talk about later when we get to defense, a guy like Caleb Herring, who is very impressive as a defensive lineman at Tennessee and has shown his potential when he gets on the field, but is just not going to be a starter. I don't love taking guys from other power conference schools who haven't done all that much. I like taking guys who are working their way up. And Anwar O'Neal, one of the top graded offensive linemen coming out of the Conference USA from Delaware, has played a ton over the past few seasons. Tennessee, Louisville also in the mix there. If you could get a guy like that who's working his way up, I think that'd be very helpful. Offensive tackle / center, DJ Chester out of LSU. Baylor, Georgia Tech, South Carolina, the other teams that are, looking there. But kind of getting to the point I just made, I'm going to be a little bit weary of the LSU guys because LSU's offensive line was garbage this year. And Chester's PFF grade, it was like in the 50s. It was not great. Does that mean he can't play? No, he was a freshman all-SEC performer in 2024. And I don't think he was getting coached up all that well in Baton Rouge, just to be completely honest, as none of their offensive linemen were. But I would wonder, is he someone who could really step in? But it does seem like he's one of the more talented offensive linemen Mississippi State's in the mix for. The name that everyone's going to bring up is Mario Nash from Florida State because he was a 4-star within the state of Mississippi, was committed to Mississippi State last year before ultimately flipping to the Seminoles. I'll be honest, I don't know. Just going off of offers, like right now, the other teams that are interested in him are James Madison, Southern Miss, and Louisiana Lafayette. Now, I believe he was visiting Mississippi State tonight as we record. This guy was a 4-star just last year. So it's not like he that quickly became an unplayable player. I don't know if he even really played for Florida State this year. I do think the offer sheet probably means something. So I don't know if for sure that's a guy you go out and get. You'll notice as I'm talking, I don't sound super confident in all of these. Now, I will be completely upfront with everyone and say that I've not spent time breaking down the film on any of these players to tell you for sure how I would judge them. I also don't know if I would be a great judge of O-line performance just in general. I'm going off of what they're rated. I'm going after what schools are interested. I'm going after the likelihood that the school they were at wanted them to stick around. There's not a lot of high-level offensive linemen in the portal. Just the fact of the matter. The top-rated offensive lineman in the portal, I believe, is another kid out of LSU who had a terrible PFF grade this year. And PFF is not the be-all, end-all. I get that. The number 2 offensive lineman in the portal is Lance Hurd out of Tennessee, who Tennessee fans are like, he was wanting $3 million a year from us, and he is nowhere close to worth that much. Every single one of these highly rated offensive linemen, and I know fan bases, you can't always go off what they say because fans are going to be haters to any player that leaves their program. That's just being a fan. Every single kid that hits the portal, though, for these offensive linemen, the old school is like, yeah, y'all have fun with that. He was a revolving door at XYZ position. Getting portal offensive linemen that are really good players is tough to do because a lot of those guys don't hit the portal for the simple fact that the guys who can play, the schools lock them down. And that's why Mississippi State being in the situation they're in is tough. Not developing high school offensive linemen over multiple seasons has caught up to them big time. And it's going to be difficult to pull out of it. Phil Lodeholt and Jeff Levy have their work cut out for them. They're going to have to overspend, but they're also going to have to develop their tails off this offseason and get the absolute most they can out of these transfers whenever they get them on campus.
Yeah. 2 names from Alabama real quick. They were highly recruited, Wilkin Formby and then Micah DeBose. Anyway, but no, I thought you made a good point there about it's very hard to get your hands on a really good offensive lineman in the portal. It's hard to get. It's so easy for the coaches and the schools to kind of pick you up as a 5-star prospect out of high school But for you to transfer that talent and that playing level over to college and do it for 4 years, that's really tough as it is. And, I don't think State should beat themselves up if they don't get the highest rated offensive lineman out there. And, I think they just need to pick somebody up, put them to work in the weight room, and just roll the dice with them on the football field in 26. Honestly, if you think about it, I mean, what else do you expect Mississippi State to do? Really, any school out there. Shoot, if Alabama, who's lost a couple guys, if they want to go get somebody, do it. What about Florida, Florida State? What about Auburn? What about Georgia? You need an offensive lineman, just go get somebody. Really, that position's all about size if you think about it, at least where it starts. It's not like, I'm not trying to downgrade the position and say that it's easy, but like when you look at a quarterback, you're looking at his mobility, you're looking at his arm strength, his accuracy, you're looking at wide receiver, you're looking at their top speed. They're just how they can catch the ball. Can they run the right route? There's so much that goes into all these other positions. Offensive lineman is still very, very tough, but it's nothing to sweat over that you have to go like scratching your brain on when you go try to pick somebody up.
Maybe. I mean, I think you got to nail. I think there is a lot you got to go into. I mean, it's tough to project because not all the guys click, and
right.
It's tough to know how someone is going to translate, like the size and the athleticism, and how is that going to translate to the field at a position that requires so much technique. State's got their work cut out for them. That's about as much as I can say. I'm going to kind of be in believe it when I see it mode for O line. Just newsflash, unless they go out and get like multiple guys in the portal that I can go back and watch how they played over the course of the season and feel confident, like, oh wow, no, those guys performed well. I'm probably gonna have doubts about State's offensive line next year. I don't really trust where they're at with that position group.
Right.
Other side of the line of scrimmage, I think you've got a little bit more potential, and I like some of the guys they're getting on campus. And again, we're not going to go through every single name of defensive linemen who visited. We do know one guy, LSU defensive lineman Ahmad Bro, has already committed to Kentucky. So that was kind of the one guy that they had on campus that you would know was going elsewhere. But they are going after a lot of guys who are edge rushers, which is probably the biggest need that they have. They were so bad about setting the edge on defense this season. They were so bad about getting pass rush this season that teams were able to sit back and have plenty of time to throw against Mississippi State, especially if they didn't blitz. And then any team that could run, they would just run to the edge, and they could be incredibly successful running the football. I think you've got guys in that interior defensive line that can at least be space eaters and sort of handle blocking there along the defensive interior. You still want to get somebody who's more of a game record if possible. But more than anything, you got to have better edge rush performance than what you got. And I think you've got some very intriguing players. And tonight, as we record, visiting Mississippi State is All-American Conference performer Harvey Dyson out of Tulane, who was an edge rusher for the Green Wave. Absolutely outstanding this year. 36 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. A guy that is going to have a lot of programs after him. If you're Mississippi State and you want to make a splash, get Harvey Dyson to Starkville. Again, I like the idea of guys who are working their way up. And this is a guy who made impact plays in the playoff against Ole Miss. It's not like he was just beating up on bad competition in the American. Against Ole Miss, made good plays rushing off the edge. He is a very, very talented pass rusher. That would be a great win if you can get him. But obviously, you got to compete with his old coach because John Summerall is going to recruit him to Florida. So can you find a way to beat him? We'll see. But that's a guy that you want for sure. Caleb Herring out of Tennessee, and I believe I mentioned him earlier. This season, 18 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. a really talented player that, again, was, a backup for Tennessee, playing behind some guys that are a little bit more proven for the Volunteers, but made impact plays over the course of the season. And that's someone who's got a visit set up to Mississippi State. He's supposed to be coming and visiting in Starkville, I believe, in the coming days. Georgia and Miami are interested in this kid. If Georgia and Miami are interested in a defensive lineman, Mississippi State should absolutely be interested in that defensive lineman. Can you find a way to make Caleb Herring happen? That would be a huge get. Jalen Thompson from Michigan State. That's a name that has been talked about for quite some time now. Supposed to visit Mississippi State on the 8th. Not a guy who's put up big-time numbers, 26 starts in his for his career with 65 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. So, the production doesn't necessarily just blow you away, but he's visiting Notre Dame and Texas A&M. If you're visiting Notre Dame and Texas A&M, you're probably a pretty good player as a defensive edge rusher. So, State's in the game with some really talented guys. And I didn't even talk about, Tunmise Adelaide from UNLV. Now, this is a guy who's bounced around. He was a former blue chip would be on his 5th school at this point. But this season, playing for UNLV, 49 tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. Syracuse and NC State interested in him. And that's a guy who's supposed to be, I believe already took a visit to MSU or is supposed to take a visit soon. They're in the game with some productive pass rushers and some talented pass rushers that big-time programs want. I need you to get at least one. I need State to win a battle for one big-time pass rusher. If after that you get somebody else that looks like a solid player, okay, fine. And I know you've already got Jason Jenkins on board, but I would still think you probably want to get somebody else alongside him. If you can get one guy that I know can step in and be a big-time edge rusher, I will be happy at that spot. And they're at least in the game with some of these guys, but you got to get one of them to sign.
Yeah, look, you don't go after these guys for nothing. It's not. Look, there are some schools out there that are going to pursue guys in the portal just because, we just need a hole to fill at that position. But I don't want Mississippi State to be just another school that does that. I really want to see them pursue these guys, seeing potential in these guys to take that next step, to have a future in football, but also contribute to the team enough to where it's going to change the game. It's going to be a playmaker. It's going to be just guys that are going to give everything they got ultimately for Mississippi State, that you could tell there's going to be a difference on offense and defense next year.
You've got to get impact guys. You have to get guys that for sure can make a big difference. And O-line, again, I have my doubts. We'll see how it goes. I was going to say it does inspire some confidence that a lot of the guys have other power conference opportunities. But again, there's a lot of teams in the same position as Mississippi State that are looking for offensive linemen that are just desperate to get people in. So, for example, Alabama had Jimothy Lewis on campus today. It kind of tells you what people are looking when people are going after offensive linemen. And look, I'm not trying to bash Jimothy Lewis. I understand why Alabama would be interested, because if it clicks for him, he'd be awesome. We also saw Jimothy Lewis this year couldn't play for Mississippi State. And it's like, hey, Bama's interested. That's what recruiting the portal for offensive line is like. So we'll see how that goes. D-line, I'm a bit more confident because I see the guys they're in the game with, and if you can get one of them on board, I think you're in a pretty good spot. Obviously, look, there's other names out there at other positions. There's other names at the positions we talked about. I just really kind of want to focus on trench play tonight because those are the biggest spots, some of the early names State's targeting, because I do know that's where the interest is going to be. Is Mississippi State going to fix its offensive line? Are they going to get impact players on the D-line? People are more interested in that than anything else when it comes to State in the portal, rightfully so, because that's going to be what determines what this team could be. I put it out on Twitter. You're looking at a roster next year where you've got the most talented quarterback to ever step foot on campus. And I've got somebody arguing with me that that's not the case because you can't say that about him this early in his career because, he wasn't accurate as a freshman. Kamario Taylor is far and away the most talented quarterback Mississippi State has ever had step foot on campus. You got a couple big play receivers. You have a powerful running back. Defensively, you got a really talented linebacker room. You have an all-SEC performer at safety. You have an elite lockdown cornerback. All of those pieces are awesome. All of those pieces also don't mean much if you get the offensive and defensive line suck again. But my God, if you can just be average on the offensive and defensive lines, you've got the talent elsewhere to be a pretty exciting, good football team. You got to nail it in the portal. So obviously that's going to be the focus. But look, they got other spots they got to hit. We'll certainly address more of that as the offseason goes along these coming weeks. Would have to think that by the next time we get together on Thursday, State should have at least one more, if not multiple more players committed. You would imagine they would, because everybody's getting those commitments at this point. So we'll continue to update Mississippi State of the transfer portal, figure out how this roster is rounding into form for the 2026 season. Appreciate everybody who tuned in tonight. Oh, do want to say real quick, shout out to men's basketball. Massive win at Texas. Josh Hubbard was awesome. I know the stat line from a shooting percentage standpoint isn't great, but anybody who's a Mississippi State fan knows, one, he's about the only guy on the team other than Jaden Epps that State fans want to see taking a shot right now. And two, he made the buckets when he absolutely had to and made the big game-changing plays. Shout out to Hub. Jaden Epps is also awesome. Achor had a good game. Sergey Makara played pretty well. They're starting to play better. That's a quad one road win. They are in a spot. It's not out of the question that if they got on a run, they could sneak their way back into postseason talk. They're still a far way away from that, but it's possible. Will pointing out there's drama going on with Jabari McGee. Yeah, I know about that. We'll see what happens there. Hopefully they get that sorted out. Also, you asked if there's a possession wide receiver on the roster. Aiden Williams kind of played like a possession receiver this year with the way he got used. So we'll see. But shout out to basketball. That was great. Women's basketball, not so much. That was pretty rough against Oklahoma, just getting absolutely steamrolled. But it is what it is. Oklahoma's a good team. Sam's still done a good job with that team this year. We'll see how they go. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. If you haven't already, please leave us a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and have that notification bell turned on so you do know when we do go live. And as always, swing your sword and
college football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.